Hi everyone, Dr. Husky, and today we are going to be talking about imagery and how we can use that in our workouts. So imagery is a tool used by a lot of elite athletes, but everyone uses it. So if you've ever read a book and imagined the scenarios, you've imagined the characters and the locations and the action and all of that as you read, you've used imagery. Or if you've listened to a story and just, kind of created that scenario, you've used imagery. If you ever imagined yourself being somewhere you're not, like maybe on a vacation, that's imagery. Well, when we use it specific and with purpose, it becomes a tool to use in sports psychology. So we're going to learn about it. We're going to learn how it works, some of the characteristics of it, and then how to write our own imagery script, okay, which is a lot more informal than it sounds. There's no worksheet with this video because I want you to take that time to create your own imagery script, and that doesn't really require a worksheet because it's very individual. So imagery is a cognitive experience that involves the senses to create a scenario. So we're thinking in our head, we're using all of our senses to create this scenario. It's as simple as imagining being in the mountains on a hike, okay? We would kind of break into each of our senses and kind of like actually experience that as we go. So we use imagery to do all kinds of things in sports psychology. We can boost confidence, we can control our arousal levels so we're not too pumped up or not pumped up enough. We can use it to change our self-talk. So we will kind of allude to a lot of that in this presentation, but just remember that it involves all of your senses. So the more senses you can bring in, the more vivid it's going to be and the more meaningful. So this is a list of the general ways that we can use imagery. You can see we can use it to motivate, to work through our thinking processes, or to help us in injury rehab, which is sort of kind of a combination of here. I just wanted to throw this up here because I know that some of you are recovering from injuries now, and some of you may have injuries, so you may want to know that this actually exists. So we can use it for motivational reasons. If you imagine yourself, finishing a workout or like at graduation, you imagine yourself being successful, just general motivational. So it's like we kind of step into this other place. So we're here, but we're either going back to the past and drawing from a positive experience. So we use that to like build confidence, or we are jumping into the future and imagining ourselves reaching this goal, and that's building motivation, okay? So it's basically leaving the current present moment to kind of draw on either the past or the future in a way that makes it more real for us, okay? So we can use it, again, for specific goals, and that kind of goes with general mastery. So that's imagining ourselves doing well on something. It's not how we got there, but it's just that we did it. Those general feelings of, yes, I did this, and what's going on with all of our senses when we feel that. We can also use it for arousal. So if we go into a game or a test or an interview, we might be too nervous, so we would need to use imagery to calm ourselves down. An example of this is because we want to practice imagery often, we would prepare for this. So let's say it's an interview. We would prepare for it by going through an imagery experience of what it might be like to do that interview. And then by the time we actually make it to the interview, it's not that overwhelming because we've done it before, right? We've gone through that process in our head. So we can use it to kind of prepare for those events. Michael Phelps actually uses that a lot. There's a little video clip, I'm going to provide the link for you, of him talking about the ways that he does use imagery, and he uses it for all of these. So when it's cognitive, we work on like specific skills. So maybe if you're trying to refine a skill, or if you're recovering from injury, you can use it to go over the rehab process, like those right here, the actual exercises that you're doing, or improving those skills that you'll be doing when you come back from rehab. And then strategy, you can, various scenarios. So that can be team specific, or that could be, your specific. If you miss the shot, what happens? Someone asks you this, what do you do? So just kind of imagining all of those things as you go along. In injury rehab, it can be super helpful because what we're going to find is that it basically, when we use it correctly, it uses those pathways, right, the neuromotor pathways in our body, it uses them. We go through the entire process as if we were going to perform that action. We just don't actually perform it. So when we go through that process, it's still keeping that route fresh and familiar to us. So even though we can't perform the actual physical movements, it can still keep that fresh, okay? And it's still something for us to engage in and stay in touch with what it feels like to perform. So the thing that you need to remember about how imagery works is that neurons that fire together wire together. So that means we begin making these associations, and when they start firing together, so we start doing things, whether that's like motor skills or thinking, those neurons become partners, okay? And when they wire together, they begin to create these pathways through our brain. Those pathways, the more traveled they are, the more they're going to become our default. So I like this visual image here. It's like a pathway in the woods. So if you were going through the woods and you came across here, would you go on this pathway or would you go through here? Probably going to go here. That's what your brain's going to do as well, your brain and your body. Whatever is common, whatever is the most traveled, whatever is the most established, that's what our brain will do and our body will do. That's why, like, when we start learning new moves and it feels really unfamiliar and clunky, it's because we're clearing the brush through here. We're creating those connections between our neurons and our muscles and making them coordinate together in a new way. But eventually that skill becomes common, and that's the path that we take. This also happens for your thoughts. So if you have a tendency to go negative or go positive, you can't just flip a switch, because let's say you have fallen into a spiral of negative thoughts, negative self-talk, maybe just negative thoughts in general. That's your pathway. That's what's happening, okay? And in order to change it to positive, you've got to start working here and clearing this path, this brush, so that you have a good path. So imagery can help us with that. Because even though we may not be performing the actual move, like when we're injured or we can't work out, we're still traveling this pathway all the way up until actually executing the move. If we travel the pathway where we are thinking about confidence, we're thinking about goals, we're thinking about those experiences of mastery, then that becomes common. That becomes our default. And those imagery experiences make real life easier to adjust to, easier to cope with. That's exactly what Michael Phelps does. He is able to imagine lots of different scenarios. So when, in one of his races, when his goggles broke, he already knew that pathway. It wasn't a new thing. He wasn't trying to clear the brush out in the middle of a race. He knew it. He knew what he was going to do. Now, we all can't achieve that level, but this is what we're striving for with imagery, okay, is to just use it to our advantage so that these things, the things that we want, kind of manifest themselves because we work at it. So now that I've convinced you that imagery works and how it works, let's talk about what it actually needs. So we're going to bounce around here. I've just kind of organized these so that you can keep them in your head as I go. So as we do imagery, we want it to be as vivid as possible. That's where your senses come in. So you can, imagine something, even that path in the woods. If we were imagining that scenario, just us hiking down that path, then we would bring in all of our senses. So is it cold outside? Like, do we have a jacket on? Is it rainy? Is our skin kind of cold or hot? Is it hot and we're sweaty? We're hiking in East Tennessee in the summer and it's just humid. How does how does it taste? Are we thirsty? What do we see? What do we hear? There are birds everywhere. Do we hear a bear? Like, what's going on? So we just pull in all those senses, and even like what's happening in our body. So how does it feel to walk on that pathway? Is it, hard dirt? Is it soft dirt? Like, how does that feel to actually move through space that way? So the more vivid we can get it, the better. We want to see it internally and externally, okay? So we want to do it through our own eyes and as if we were watching ourselves. It seems creepy in a woods scenario, but you can imagine if you were on TV, they were filming a show of you and you were hiking through the woods. That external perspective. I think that's easier in sport when you imagine somebody sitting in the bleachers watching you. That's the external perspective. And then going back down here, we want to add in our emotions, okay? We don't always think about that, but those are important. So as we're hiking, are we tired? Are we happy? Are we enjoying it? And how does that feel in our body? Do we have butterflies in our stomach because we're getting to a waterfall? Are we bored because we hate this? What's happening emotionally? When we can create those emotional scenarios, again, they take it up to another level of real and vivid. And then when we begin to retrieve what we need from those imagery practices, then it's easier to retrieve because in a more emotional experience is stored differently in our bodies. So the more emotional, the more we remember it, which is good when it's a good emotion, bad when it's a bad emotion. And then the main thing we want to remember is that controllability is super important. If you are imagining walking on that, going on that hike and you can't control what's going on, so maybe you're afraid of snakes. I don't love snakes, but so if I'm walking through and I've got this scenario going and I keep imagining a snake crossing my path and I can't respond to it appropriately, then I'm not controlling that imagery experience well enough. And that is one of the only situations where it could actually hinder your performance. So you want to make sure that you can control your experience before you dive deeply into, sport-specific skills. So just keep those things in mind. The main thing is the controllability, like make sure that you can control it. Then if you can, you want to make sure that it's vivid, it brings in the emotions, and we watch it internally and externally. Okay, so these are some more specific directions, what we were just talking about. So you want to start simple, just with general motivational imagery. So a great example is just imagining how you're going to feel after you complete your workout. That doesn't require a lot of detail. It doesn't require a lot of control, but it will give you an idea of if you can control your imagery or not. If you can, then you can move on to add more vividness and get more specific so that you're doing sport-specific skills. If you can't control your imagery, then when you're using it, it could kind of throw off your game because you're thinking too much about what could go wrong and focusing on that rather than the positives. So as you practice, we've talked about varying your perspective and the outcomes. So also vary your speed. See yourself going slow motion and going fast motion. Kind of like again, just imagine. I think social media is a great example of this. So imagine what you would post on social media if you were doing that thing where you were posting your workout so that everyone knew you did it. So imagine how that's going to look, right? That's the external perspective, and you can vary your speed. Would you record yourself like, bench pressing slow motion or fast so they can see how many reps you did? So kind of use that as a guideline. But the most important thing here is that you practice regularly. I think because it's a mental thing, we often feel like it's a waste of time because we're not doing something physical. But if we use imagery and we want it to improve our skills, then we need to do it regularly. So if you're not working out or you feel tired or you know that you're burnt out, maybe working out, we keep mentioning that like maybe we're not working out because we're stuck at home, but maybe working out has been your outlet and maybe you have physically burnt yourself out, working out too much. Use imagery to do your workout, because what happens is your pathways will go through just like they were going to do that move, but then they stop when they actually get to the physical, muscle contraction part. So it's a great tool to use for injury recovery and for rest days. So you also want to kind of vary your locations and times, so where you actually practice the imagery. If you can do it, on a court or on a field, if that's where you're, kind of what you're practicing, then, or what your scenarios that you're imagining, then that could be even better. A lot of elite athletes will go out onto the court or, by the pool. Michael Phelps will go by the pool and kind of run through his thing so that, those sounds are already there. That feeling is already there. All right, so now let's talk about imagery scripts. So a script is a lot less formal than you think. Sometimes you can start out and actually write the script just to kind of make sure you are directing yourself appropriately. But what I suggest is to start with a general and just kind of think about like why you're doing it. Make sure that it's focused on the motivation and the outcome. But you can also, like if you get specific enough and you get skilled at it enough, you can write it down, you can record it, like voice record, so it's kind of like a meditation that you're listening to, or you can just memorize it. Or you can kind of just remember, the senses as you go through, and just kind of make sure that you go with including everything. But the most important thing is to practice regularly, and be realistic with your experiences. Like, you don't want to imagine yourself flying in space or, anything like that. Like, make sure that it's something that you can actually achieve and practice regularly as if it were a physical exercise. All right. Good luck.